War is always a lie, and it's always begun by a set of lies. Truth is the first casualty of war, said Aeschylus the Greek thousands of years ago. And usually the lie is a staged incident that gives the excuse for going to war. And these kind of staged incidents, which frighten people, become a way to get social hegemony and social control.
Is this a conspiracy? Quite the opposite. It is a high-profile project known as the Project for the New American Century. The project is a neoconservative manifesto which includes in its toolbox the unbridled use of war in clearing a path for U.S. interests. The will to attack Iraq came entirely from this visible yet sinister group. September the 11th was merely the pretext. Bush is merely the figurehead.
The Defense Planning Guidance Draft of 1992 was written during the administration of Bush Sr. by Paul Wolfowitz for then Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney. Its central strategy was to establish and protect a new order. It mentions preemptive attacks and a plan for military intervention in Iraq as an action necessary to ensure, quote, access to vital raw material, primarily Persian Gulf oil. In September of 2000, the neoconservative think tank, PNAC, or the Project for the New American Century, wrote a document entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses. Some of the goals set forth in PNAC call for increased defense spending to preserve American geopolitical leadership, to exploit the revolution in military affairs, develop and deploy global missile defense, as well as to fight and win multiple, simultaneous, major theater wars. PNAC cited biological warfare as a politically useful tool. The document states, quote, advanced forms of biological warfare that can target specific genotypes may transform biological warfare from the realm of terror to a politically useful tool. This document also called for a premeditated attack on Iraq to secure regime change. PNAC's RAD also planned for a new Pearl Harbor, such as 9/11. Specifically, it states, quote, the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor.
This is about control over Middle East oil. It indicates that America is aiming for global leadership, both military and economically, and what it says, I think, is chilling. It says if we are going to transform America into tomorrow's dominant force, that's their phrase, then it's going to be a long process unless there is a catastrophic and catalyzing event, like Pearl Harbor.
Another similar document was the National Security Strategy of the United States of America, or NSS 2002. The document states in Chapter 8, quote, the events of September 11, 2001 opened vast, new opportunities.
Long before September 11th, a small, influential group of neoconservatives here in Washington had wanted to see the United States transformed into a sort of benevolent ruler, unchallenged, astride the world. And long before George W. Bush was elected, they sat down and they wrote down a manifesto. The document was effectively a charter of the Project for a New American Century, a neoconservative think tank in Washington.
The founding members included Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz of the Defense Department, Richard Pearl, head of the Defense Advisory Board, Louis Libby, Cheney's Chief of Staff, John Bolton, Undersecretary of State for Arms Control, L.A. Cohen, who's on the Defense Policy Board.
Much of what these men wanted is coming true. They urged that the U.S. abandon the anti-ballistic missile treaty. It has. They wanted establishment of more permanent U.S. military bases abroad. That is happening in the Philippines and in Georgia and will likely happen in Iraq. They urged regime change as a goal of foreign wars, not just in Iraq. They wanted the U.S. as a global constabulary, their word, unburdened by the UN or world opinion, preventing any challenge to U.S. dominance. But, they wrote, a year before September 11th, such aspirations are unlikely to be realized without a catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor.
False flag, a covert operation designed to appear it was carried out by another nation or group.
False flag operations are shocking, often destructive, arranged events that are attributed to somebody other than the party that actually was responsible for them. The term false flag comes from naval warfare, in which vessels would sometimes fly a flag that was not their true flag in order to implicate some other party. They provide excuses for war. They trigger political changes or policy changes. They're often used to demonize a popular movement and bring on repression against popular movements. And many times they get used for all of these purposes at once.
What is a false flag? The encyclopedia definition reads, false flag operations are covert operations conducted by governments, corporations, or by other organizations which are designed to appear as if they were carried out by other entities. The name is derived from the military concept of flying false colors, that is, flying the flag of a country other than your own. There are many variants of false flag operations, but one of the most popular carried out by governments is to stage a terror attack or horrible criminal incident and then blame it on your political enemies. In the early 1960s, the federal government needed an excuse, a pretext to invade Cuba. Seldom do we see examples as sterling as the Northwoods document, where the federal government actually put the plan to paper. It was actually carried in published media reports in ABC News and, of course, the Baltimore Sun. The federal government proposed blowing up airliners full of Americans, saying that casualty lists in U.S. newspapers would cause a helpful wave of indignation. The mad general, the architect of this plan, was General L.L. Lemonster, Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff. He got approval for his Faustian plan all the way up to the Secretary of Defense. President Kennedy was not amused. In the plan, they elaborated on how they could bomb Washington, D.C. and blame it on Cuba. Attack Marines at Guantanamo Bay using U.S. Army soldiers dressed up as Cubans. Or, they said, just like the sinking of the Maine to get into the Spanish-American War, we could blow up a ship again. Here they are admitting the problem-reaction solution system and how effective it is to motivate the American people to get them behind a war, a nuclear war with Cuba and the Soviet Union. And you didn't believe that the government was capable of hijacking its own aircraft and killing its own citizens. The government had complete and total prior knowledge of the horrible events that happened here. And at the bare minimum, they allowed this tragedy to take place as a pretext to scare the population into total abject fear and then submission.
September 11th was the jumpstart for what is now an accelerated agenda by the ruthless elite. It was a staged war pretext no different than the sinking of the Lusitania, the provoking of Pearl Harbor, and the Gulf of Tonkin lie. In fact, if 9/11 wasn't a planned war pretext, it would be an exception to the rule. It has been used to launch two unprovoked illegal wars, one against Iraq and one against Afghanistan. However, 9/11 was a pretext for another war as well, the war against you. The Patriot Act, Homeland Security, the Military Tribunals Act, and other legislations are all completely and entirely designed to destroy your civil liberties and limit your ability to fight back against what is coming.